in history, U.S. history to be more specific, even though we'll talk about some other countries just for clarification. But here we go. Women in history. Here's the deal. This video is to help you fill out the study guide, but it's kind of like an overshoot of every single topic that we're going to talk about, most of the topics that we're going to talk about with women's suffrage movement, women's rights movement, in this first unit of study in semester 2. So here we go. The term I would start with is social norm. You see, there's social norms that we have. Achoo! You would say, bless you, right? You walk on the right side of the hallway. There's different social norms that we do on a daily basis. And a social norm that's about to get broken like an egg on the floor is the idea of women having the right to vote. Because, you know, that's just not how things work. And now it's going to be how things are. And whenever you break a social norm, whenever you take what used to be true or used to be normal, used to be the way things went, and you go, you know what, we're going to change a little bit, people freak out. So people are going to freak out a little bit. But it's okay, because sometimes with the pain and frustration, you get something good, and this is more people with the right to vote. That's always a good thing. So here we go. Breaking the social norm. Now understand, back in the day, this is, World War I-ish, women were in the workforce. And now they technically were always part of the workforce. They always did something for our society. They always did something to benefit our society in a way that allowed other people to work and benefit from the, having a job and stuff. But this is the first time women are starting to get paid. There's about 5 million people, 5 million women that were earning wages in the 1900s. So they're finally earning money for what they did, which is always nice. But understand, women are getting more and more rights. They're getting more. They have right to wages. They're getting degrees. They are they're part of unions. They can make contracts. They can write wills. So they're getting more and more power, and the social norm of them getting the right to vote really stems from this idea they're supporting the president, and they're supporting the idea of World War I and supporting the troops. And yes, there's groups of women that didn't, and just like there's groups of men that didn't. But generally speaking, there was women's rights movements that were pushing this idea of, patriotic enthusiasm to help the war, and this will turn the shape of women's rights and give us the 19th Amendment. Vote, the right for women to vote. Okay, so New Jersey, you should note this down. Go New Jersey, 1807. 1807, they allowed women to vote. So go them, but typically speaking, women weren't allowed to vote. Now, more women were actually allowed to vote in the West. So as those Western states open up, California and Colorado, and if you get a map of the United States, you'll see that the Western states opened up voting first. And now you're like, why would they let the women vote? Because they wanted women to come to the West, because they're trying to open up, more Americans to go there to, boom their towns over there, to make states that have a good population. Don't have a good population, I don't know if you know this, you need to have women too, because they're going to have kids. So what they want to do is, hey, come over here and we'll let you vote. And they're like, okay. And it was just shameful that the other states were just not going to let that happen without some sort of selfish need. Also, as far as country goes, we were not the first. We were not the last, but we were not the first to give women the right to vote. The Scandinavian countries gave women the right to vote. There's other European countries that gave women the right to vote. But there's also countries that took a long time, like 1960s in certain cases, to let women the right to vote. So go us. And although it's kind of sad that it took all the way up to World War I to start giving women the right to vote, it could be worse. We've done things that might have been more, let's just say, frowned upon than this. But we'll talk about those later. For women's rights to vote, really, let's start with the top. The president. The president really does push for this idea of women having the right to vote. This really comes out of the patriotism that women showed during World War I and helping the war effort. But there was people that opposed it. The opposition were Southern Democrats. Now, when I say Democrats or Republicans, people go, oh, those Democrats today or those Republicans today? No, we're talking about Democrats and Republicans from like the 15s to the 20s. They're not the same people. They're not even the same ancestors to a certain degree. These were Southern Democrats, and as you'll see in the electoral map right now, there's really not a whole lot of Southern Democrats left. A lot of the Southern states that I'm talking about, it's red, but it doesn't matter. It's back then, folks. But they were against it, and one of the arguments that they make, and it's probably the most irritating argument in my mind, is it's the states' rights. The states' rights argument has been used for the most atrocious things in history. And there's some legitimate reasons to claim states' rights on things, don't get me wrong. But when you say it's your states' rights to oppress somebody or to limit the freedom of somebody, it's not the states' rights. You're limiting freedom. For instance, it was the states' rights to have slavery. That's a state right. We have the right to enslave a human being. That's not how any of this works. We have the state right. We have the states' rights was argued for segregation. No, like when you're infringing on the rights of people, you can't then claim it's states' rights to infringe on the rights on people. So, and that's what's happening here. The Southern Democrats were saying it's the states' rights to limit the ability to vote for women. Blah. I know, it's ridiculous. Comes the amendment, the 19th Amendment. There was arguments that took place of what women should have the right to do, and one of them is the Minor versus Happersett court case. And in this court case, it was basically, the argument was the 14th Amendment. Because you remember the 14th Amendment, it goes this idea that if you're born here, you are given all rights as an American. And this was used as an argument for women. Hey, they're born here, so shouldn't they have the right to vote because they have all rights of an American, right? And it turned out no. Court decided that it was only pertaining to African Americans at the time, and African American men to be more specific. So Minor versus Happersett was an argument that the 14th Amendment, because you're born here, you're given all rights, should allow women the right to vote. Turns out ruling against that, and done deal. Another thing to keep in mind before this kind of a push towards 19th Amendment was the Seneca Falls Convention. This was the first public gathering of women to voice their opinions on voting rights. And yes, there was other things that took place, but generally speaking, this is the first one that you have a bunch of women there to argue for the right to vote. But these are stepping stones that I kind of skipped over in the last video. But there you go. Gives women power though. That's the pushes this idea that we should deserve more. And by more, equal. That's the other thing too. When we talk about the push for rights, it usually gets because we want more rights. No, you want to be treated equally. It's not about more rights. It's about equal rights. So that's one of the things that pushes this is they're the big consumers. Women are the big consumers. They're the ones purchasing things for the house. They're the ones that are determining what needs to go into the house, which is really the driving force to manufacturers out there, which gives men jobs. So because of this, they have some power in the economy. One of the things they do is they actually boycott certain businesses. And if you have a bunch of women boycott a business, oh, no, you didn't. That business is going to go under because they're the ones that are primary consumers. Also, they start taking jobs that give them more positions. Secretary jobs, being a typer, being a receptionist, those take place. And it starts getting women their foot in the door into businesses. And it's going to push them again to go, hey, see how we can work just like you? And by the way, during World War I, they worked just like men because, men were fighting. So we can work just like you, which means we should be able to, vote just like you. Talk about the people. People you should know. First one, Susan B. Anthony. She's actually, if you go to that website, if you looked at the website that you did your paper on, she was on the list that you could have chosen. Wow, killing two birds with one stone you could have done. Yeah, it's too late now. So here's the deal. One thing you know about her is the amendment, the 19th Amendment, the way it's written, it comes from her. She wrote it the way it is. Okay? She founded the National Suffrage Association. But the language that we see in the 19th Amendment, you can thank Susan B. Anthony for that. That's what she did. Let's talk about Elizabeth Stanton. She starts the official women's movement. If you want to give the rights to the women's movement, give it to her. She started it. She was the president of what's called NASA for 20 years, which we talked about in class, and we'll talk about more in class actually. Carrie Chapman Catt, which is the 3 C's. Remember as the 3 C's because she's the only person that has 3 C's in her names. She came up with the winning plan. Basically, she came up with the idea, the way to get enough states and enough legislators to vote for the amendment by just one at a time. Going through and pushing her plan through one state at a time. It was smart. It was the way to go. It got what she needed to get done. Alice Paul, she's this militant person, and she, I like to equate her with Malcolm X, and hopefully we get to the civil rights movement. I can talk about this more. Malcolm X was pushing for equal rights just like Martin Luther King Jr., but he was more militant. And what I mean by that, he was more let's fight fire with fire a little bit, and you can kind of see why that would be, and to a certain degree respect it, and also say maybe Martin Luther King's peaceful idea was Marty. I get the arguments on both sides, but she's more militant. She's more like hands up, and she's eventually arrested, and she is force fed because when she's arrested, she decides to go and not eat. She's going to go on hunger strike, so they force fed her, and they basically just slid all this stuff. It was bad news bears. But Alice Paul, she's more militant. She ends up being force fed after she's arrested. Jeanette Rankin, also a person on that list of people, first woman ever to be elected to the U.S. Congress, which is awesome. She's breaking that glass ceiling, if you will, of being elected to Congress, which is great. She's also a person who voted against both world wars. I think she's like the only congresswoman to do, or congresswoman to do that. She saw war as an opportunity just to perpetuate violence, and she didn't think it was our right to do it. But argue against her, well, she's the first woman ever to be elected into Congress, which is pretty awesome. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, she wrote the book on women in economics. It's actually a really interesting. I read this book in college, and it's an interesting read if you look at it from the perspective of the time. But just how women are impacted and how women impact the economy around them, it's pretty impressive. But those are the women that you need to know about for this unit. Knock it out.